On my first week working the night shift at a funeral home, one of the bodies sat up on the embalming table while I was alone in the room, and at first I didn't react. I just froze there with my hand still resting on the edge of the stainless steel tray, staring at it like my brain needed a few extra seconds to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, because bodies don't sit up, not like that, not slowly, not deliberately, and definitely not without making any sound. But that's exactly what it did, rising just enough to shift from flat to upright, head slightly tilted forward like it was trying to look at me, even though its eyes were still closed. And that's when I realized something worse. The security camera mounted in the corner, the one that always faced the table, wasn't pointed at us anymore. It had turned slightly, just enough that it couldn't see the body at all. My name is Caleb Turner. I was 25 when this happened, and I had taken a night job at a small funeral home in Asheville because I needed something quiet, something steady after bouncing between jobs for months. And the manager told me straight up that nights were easy, mostly paperwork, occasional cleaning, checking doors, and making sure everything stayed secure until the morning staff arrived. No visitors, no services, just me in the building, which honestly sounded perfect at the time, and for the first few nights, it was exactly that. Quiet to the point where every little sound stood out. The hum of refrigeration units in the prep room, the faint ticking of an old wall clock in the hallway, the soft flicker of fluorescent lights that never seemed completely stable. I'd sit at the desk, write down security logs every hour, walk the hallways to check locked doors, glance at the cameras that showed the viewing room, the office, the back entrance, and the preparation area where the bodies are kept before services. Everything routine, everything predictable, until that night when I noticed something small that didn't sit right. It was around 12:40 a.m., and I was checking the camera feeds when I saw the door to the prep room slightly open, just a narrow gap. And I remember thinking, I must have forgotten to close it properly after my last check. So I grabbed my flashlight and went to fix it, the hallway colder than usual as I walked down, the air carrying that sterile smell of cleaning chemicals and something faintly metallic. And when I reached the door, it was closed, completely shut, exactly how it should have been. And I stood there for a second confused, because I knew what I had seen on the monitor, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the angle or a reflection, and went back to the office. But when I checked the cameras again, the door was open once more. Same narrow gap, same position, and that's when I noticed something worse. The timestamp on the camera feed was flickering, skipping a second forward and then back, like it couldn't decide what moment it was showing, and I felt that small unease settle in my chest again, the kind you try to ignore. So I went back to the prep room a second time, more alert now, listening carefully as I walked. And as I got closer, I heard something faint from inside, like a soft shifting sound, fabric brushing against metal. Not loud, but enough to make me pause before opening the door. And when I pushed it open, the room was exactly how it should have been. The body laid out on the table, covered from the chest down, everything still, everything quiet. And I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, telling myself it was nothing, just nerves, just the building settling. But then I heard it again, a small movement, right behind me, and when I turned, there was nothing there, just the empty doorway and the hallway beyond. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The sheet covering the body had shifted slightly, just enough that it wasn't sitting the way it had been a second ago. And I stood there staring at it, trying to remember exactly how it had looked before, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. So I stepped closer, my hand hovering over the edge of the sheet, and then I stopped, because I realized something else. The position of the arms under the fabric had changed, subtly, but enough that I could tell. And that's when I noticed something worse. The camera in the corner wasn't pointed at the table anymore. It had shifted just slightly, like someone had nudged it out of alignment, and I hadn't touched it. No one had. And that's when I felt that deeper unease turn into something closer to fear. Because now it wasn't just my perception that was off. Something in the environment had changed too, and I stepped back slowly, my eyes still fixed on the table, waiting, listening. And then it happened. The body moved. Not a twitch, not a random spasm, but a slow, controlled motion. The upper half lifting off the table into a sitting position. And I froze completely, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. And for a second I actually thought maybe the person wasn't dead. Maybe there had been some mistake. But that thought fell apart immediately, because I had seen the paperwork. I knew the details. And the way it moved didn't feel like someone waking up. It felt deliberate. Like it was following an action rather than reacting. And then, just as slowly as it had sat up, it turned its head slightly in my direction, stopping just short of facing me fully, like it didn't need to look directly to know where I was. And that's when I stepped back, my mind racing, telling me to leave, to get out, but my body hesitated, locked in place by that need to understand, and then it lowered itself back down onto the table, the motion just as controlled, just as quiet, until it was lying flat again, exactly like before. And for a moment, everything was still, silent, like nothing had happened at all, and I stood there longer than I should have, pleading for something else, anything, but nothing came, and that's when I noticed something worse. The position of the camera had shifted back, perfectly aligned with the table again, like it had never moved, and that's when I realized, if I checked the footage, it probably wouldn't show any of this, and that thought hit me harder than the movement itself, because it meant there would be no proof, nothing to confirm I hadn't imagined it. And I left the room after that, faster than I wanted to admit, going back to the office and immediately pulling up the camera feed, rewinding it to the moment I entered the prep room, and just like I expected, nothing unusual appeared. The body never moved, the camera never shifted. It was all normal, completely normal, and I stared at the screen, my hands resting on the desk, trying to steady myself, trying to decide if I was losing it, if maybe the isolation, the quiet, the stress had finally gotten to me. But then the radio on the desk crackled softly, something it hadn't done all night, and a voice came through, low, slightly distorted, saying, "You're not supposed to watch it." And I felt that cold rush go through me again, because I hadn't said anything into the radio. I hadn't even touched it, and I asked, "Who is this?" But there was no answer, just a faint static that lingered before cutting out. And that's when I noticed something on the logbook in front of me, a new entry that hadn't been there before, written in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right, slightly off in the way the letters curved, and next to the timestamp it read, 1:12 a.m., subject sat up, and beneath it, in smaller text, observed. And I felt my stomach drop, as I realized I hadn't written that. And that's when I noticed something worse. There was another line underneath, one I definitely hadn't written. Next time, don't react. And I pushed the logbook away from me, my heart pounding. Because now it wasn't just the body. It wasn't just the cameras. Something else was aware of me, aware of my actions, and that thought was enough to break whatever hesitation I had left. I grabbed my keys, stood up, and headed for the front door. Not caring about finishing the shift, just needing to get out of that building. And as I walked down the hallway, I couldn't stop myself from glancing back toward the prep room. And for a split second, I thought I saw movement again. The edge of the door shifting slightly, like it was opening just a crack. And I didn't wait to confirm it. I just kept walking, faster now, until I reached the exit, unlocked it, and stepped outside into the cold night air. The silence out there, somehow feeling safer than the silence inside. And I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back, quitting the job the next morning without explanation. But even now, months later, I still think about that night, about what I saw, about what wrote in that logbook, and sometimes, when I'm alone and everything is quiet, I can't shake the feeling that if I had stayed just a little longer, it wouldn't have laid back down the second time.